Micah's small hand pressed to the locked door just as Liana's sob broke again inside. The sound was thin, almost polite, the kind of crying that had learned not to ask for help. It slipped through the seam of the white-painted door at the end of the east hallway, past the brass handle polished by staff who never opened it, and into the blue half-light, where Naomi stood frozen with a basket of folded laundry against her hip. The mansion around them was too grand for childhood sorrow. Black marble floors, oil portraits, chandeliers glowing low after midnight. But grief had a way of making even luxury feel hollow. Micah, barefoot in dinosaur pajamas, had wandered out of the servants' wing because he had heard what the adults kept pretending not to hear. He tilted his head, curls mussed with sleep, and touched the door again as if it were a hurt animal. Naomi's pulse jumped into her throat. She had been told on her first day never to approach that room after dark. The instruction had come not from cruelty, but from fear wrapped in household discipline. Liana Moretti slept there. Liana Moretti cried there. And in this house, everyone knew the second fact better than they knew what to do about the first. Naomi crossed the hall in 3 quick steps, set the laundry basket down without a sound, and scooped Micah back from the door before his knuckles could tap the panel. Not there. Her whisper was firmer than she felt, but Micah twisted in her arms and looked at her with the stubborn seriousness only toddlers possessed. Inside the bedroom, the crying stopped so suddenly that the silence felt louder. Naomi held her breath. A lamp clicked on beyond the door. For one suspended second, she feared she had done the worst possible thing in a house built on invisible lines. Let her son trespass into the private pain of the boss's daughter. Then came a softer sound from inside. Not weeping now. Movement. Bare feet on carpet. A child standing close to the other side, listening. Naomi's stomach tightened. The danger was no longer scandal alone. If Liana opened that door and found a servant's child outside her room after midnight, word would travel through the estate by breakfast. In houses ruled by power, humiliation moved faster than kindness. Naomi could lose more than dignity. She could lose her position, the room she and Micah slept in, the fragile safety she had managed to build with 2 paychecks and very little sleep. She shifted Micah higher against her shoulder and reached for the laundry basket, ready to retreat before the latch moved. But Micah leaned out of her arms and pushed his stuffed cloth rabbit through the narrow gap beneath the door. Naomi stared. The rabbit's limp ear disappeared first, then its faded blue body, dragged inward by tiny, determined fingers. Micah had offered the one thing he never slept without. He did it without understanding rules, status, or consequence. He only understood crying. Naomi opened her mouth to stop him, yet no sound came. Something inside her gave way, not obedience, but the brittle shell of it. For the first time since entering the Moretti estate, she did not move according to the house's fear. She made a choice. She knocked once, quietly. If a child's kindness ever broke your heart, hold on to that feeling. The latch did not open. Instead, a small voice came through the door, raw from tears. Why did he give me that? Naomi lowered Micah to the floor, but kept one hand on his shoulder, anchoring him there. Her own voice was careful, almost reverent, as if speaking too loudly might shatter whatever fragile bridge had just formed through painted wood and darkness. Because he heard you crying. There was a pause long enough to feel like a confession gathering shape. Naomi could hear Liana breathing on the other side, uneven, trying to recover the way children do when they do not want adults to know how badly they hurt. Silence gathered outside the little white door like a witness that did not dare interrupt. The hallway lamps threw a honey-colored glow across polished floors, and in that soft light the truth began to move, not with drama, but with the tiny, unsteady breathing of an 8-year-old girl trying to hide her fear from a woman she had been taught not to need. On the other side of the painted wood, Liana Moretti wiped her face with the sleeve of her pajama top. Inside Naomi Carter's room, Micah Carter leaned sleepily against his mother's shoulder, his curls flattened on one side, his small hand still stretched toward the door as if he had reached across something much larger than a hallway. Then the answer came, thin and embarrassed. I wasn't crying. It was the kind of lie children tell when the truth feels too breakable to survive being named. Naomi did not correct her. She lowered herself to the floor instead, sitting with her back against the wall beside the door, bringing her voice down to the same quiet level grief uses when it wants no audience. Micah slid into her lap, half awake now, thumb near his mouth, eyes fixed on the crack of light beneath Liana's door. You don't have to explain tonight, Naomi said. But you don't have to be alone either. On the other side, the mattress gave a faint creak. Liana had moved closer. That was the first boundary to break. Not between servant and employer, not yet, but between silence and being heard. In a house as large as the Moretti estate, pain had learned to behave itself. It hid in marble hallways, in closed doors, in perfect table settings laid out each night by the 6 members of the Moretti household staff who knew how to polish silver but not how to touch the sorrow no one discussed. And for years, Elias Moretti had ruled every room in that house except the one where his daughter cried after midnight. A small voice came through the door at last. He always says I'm dreaming. Naomi's hand stilled on Micah's back. The words were simple, but they changed the air. This was no longer about a lonely child afraid of storms or shadows. It was about disbelief, the kind that cuts deeper because it comes from the person meant to make fear smaller. Naomi understood at once that Liana was not asking for comfort. She was testing whether truth could survive outside her own chest. Who says that? Naomi asked, though she already knew. Liana did not answer right away. A long breath. A swallow. Then, almost too low to hear. My father. The hallway seemed to tighten around the confession. Naomi closed her eyes for one brief second. Not in judgment. In recognition. There are wounds money can hide and power can excuse, but a child being unheard leaves a mark with its own cold shape. Elias Moretti might have built an empire that made armed men lower their eyes, but down this corridor, behind this door, his daughter had just revealed the one place his control failed him completely. Micah stirred, then lifted his head. His toddler voice, rough with sleep, slipped through the dark with devastating innocence. Bedroom. Naomi looked down at him. What did you say, baby? Micah pointed at the door. Then, with the stubborn certainty only very young children possess, he pointed farther down the hall, past Liana's room, toward the grand staircase leading to the east wing, where family portraits watched over everything in gilt silence. Lady in light, he whispered. Bedroom. Naomi felt a chill move across her skin. Children imagine things, yes? But sometimes they notice what adults edit out. A reflection, a routine, a sound repeated often enough to become invisible. Liana had said she cried every night. Every night meant pattern. Pattern meant cause. Behind the door, Liana's breathing changed. You saw her too? She asked. There it was, the first real turn of the night. Not only tears, not only loneliness. A secret had shaped now. Something seen, repeated, denied. The hallway outside Liana Moretti's room held the kind of silence that made small sounds feel guilty. Floorboards cooled under the late-night air. A grandfather clock somewhere below gave a heavy, patient tick, and in Naomi Carter's arms, sleep-warm Micah Carter stirred against her shoulder, his fingers tangled in the collar of her plain black uniform. She had found his bed empty again. Not by accident. Not wandering. Again. So this time, she waited. A blade of light cut across the bottom of Liana Moretti's door. Tiny shadows moved inside it. One unsteady and low to the floor, the other frozen near the bed. Naomi shifted closer, her pulse tightening for a reason she could not yet name, and listened through the painted wood. No crying. No panic. Just Micah's soft toddler murmur. Then a whisper from Liana, so faint it nearly vanished into the dark. Not yet, Liana said. Naomi opened the door. The room snapped into stillness. Moonlight spilled through tall windows and silvered everything it touched, the white coverlet, the carved bedposts, the polished toy chest no child seemed to use. Micah sat cross-legged on the rug in his socks, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear. Liana was not in bed. She was kneeling beside the far wall, near a narrow table set beneath an oil portrait of Elias Moretti's late wife. Her shoulders were locked. One hand hovered over a small porcelain music box shaped like a swan. Micah, Naomi said, low and firm. He looked up immediately, guilty in the instinctive way only a 3-year-old could be, as if the whole world had caught him stealing moonlight. Naomi crossed the room, lifted him to her hip, and turned toward the door. She meant to leave before questions could harden into consequences. A maid's child did not belong in the private room of the boss's daughter in the middle of the night. In a house ruled by order, that alone could cost her trust, perhaps her place. Then Liana made a sound Naomi had not heard before. Not a sob, not fear of being discovered. Panic. Don't, Liana said, the word breaking in half. Please don't take him yet. Naomi stopped. The girl's eyes were not on Micah. They were fixed on the music box. That changed everything. Naomi set Micah down, but kept a hand on his shoulder. Why does he come here? Liana swallowed. Her face had gone bloodless. Because he knows when it starts. When what starts? Liana glanced toward the door, then toward the portrait above the swan-shaped box, as if both could betray her. At 12:15, she whispered. Every night. The clock downstairs struck once. Then again. Slow enough to count. Heavy enough to feel through the floor. Naomi's breath thinned. Liana pressed both palms over her ears before the 12th strike finished. Not dramatic. Practiced. Like a ritual repeated until the body learned it faster than the mind. Micah, standing beside Naomi's skirt, looked toward the swan and pointed with sleepy certainty. Sad song, he murmured. The last chime faded. For one suspended second, nothing moved. Then the music box began to play. Neither child had touched it. A thin, delicate melody unwound into the room, sweet at first, then wrong in a way Naomi could not explain. Too slow. Too lonely. Liana backed away so fast her heel struck the bed frame. Her chest seized. She was shaking before the second measure ended. Naomi crossed the room at once and snapped the lid shut. Silence dropped hard. Liana's whole body folded inward. It always does that, she whispered. Every night after the clock. I told them it starts by itself. They said I was dreaming. I tried hiding it in the closet. It was back on the table the next morning. Naomi stared at the swan, her fingers still resting on cold porcelain. The object was old, expensive, and dustless from handling. Not forgotten. Maintained. Which meant someone in this house knew it mattered. Micah stepped free from Naomi's hand and toddled to the portrait. A wash of late-afternoon light fell across the portrait's varnished surface, turning the painted eyes into something almost alive. Micah Carter stopped beneath the frame, his small sneakers whispering over polished wood, then lifted one finger toward the girl in the painting as if he recognized her from somewhere beyond words. Naomi Carter felt the movement in her chest before she understood it. Liana Moretti had gone still behind her, the kind of stillness children reached only when fear and hope touched at once. Then footsteps approached from the hall, measured, heavy, impossible to mistake inside that house. Elias Moretti appeared in the doorway like a verdict. The room changed around him. Even the air seemed to tighten. Behind him, two members of the estate security team stopped at a respectful distance, saying nothing, while one of the 6 Moretti household staff froze beside a sideboard with a silver tray trembling in her hands. Elias looked first at the porcelain swan on the table, then at the portrait, then at his daughter's face, which had lost its nightly strain and softened into something close to peace. His eyes shifted to Micah. Why is she calm? No one answered at once. The question did not sound loud, but it landed with the force of a slammed door. Naomi straightened, one hand already reaching for Micah, instinctively drawing him back from the portrait. Liana's shoulders tensed at that small movement, and Elias noticed. A man who had built an empire by reading danger in a blink did not miss reactions like that. He stepped farther into the room. Start talking. Naomi knew better than to lie in a house built on surveillance, silence, and memory. She chose her words carefully, feeling Liana beside her like a fragile candle in a draft. She explained how Micah had wandered close to Liana earlier, how the crying had stopped for a little while, how the child had grown quiet in his presence without anyone forcing it. She did not mention comfort as if it were magic. She spoke like a mother and an employee trying not to be crushed between truth and power. Elias listened without interrupting, his face cut from stone. Then he looked at Liana. Is that true? Liana swallowed. Her fingers curled into the hem of her sleeve. For one long second Naomi thought the girl might retreat back into the silence no one had been able to break. But Liana raised her eyes to her father, and in that tiny act there was more courage than most grown men carried. Yes. The room went silent. Something moved behind Elias's stare, not softness, not yet, but alarm sharpened into control. He had spent months watching specialists fail, staff whisper, routines collapse, and his own daughter fade every night after the clock struck. Now a 3-year-old had entered the pattern, and uncertainty was the one thing Elias Moretti hated more than defiance. "From this moment on," he said, each word precise, "the children stay apart." Naomi froze mid-breath. Liana took one step forward. No, every face in the room changed. One guard lowered his eyes. The staff member with the tray nearly dropped it. Elias turned to his daughter slowly, as if recalculating the architecture of the world. "You do not give orders here," he said. Liana's chin trembled, but she did not step back. "He doesn't make it worse." That landed harder than pleading would have. Elias looked at Naomi again, and now the command carried a second blade. "You will keep Micah Carter with you at all times unless I say otherwise. And you will tell me everything you know about my daughter's condition, the swan, this room, and who has been hiding it." Naomi felt the trap close from both sides. If she protected Liana's trust, she risked Elias's wrath. If she exposed everything too quickly, she might hand a frightened child back to the very machinery that had ignored her. This was no longer a private discovery between a maid, a little girl, and a toddler. Rain pressed softly against the tall windows, turning the east wing into a dim corridor of silver and shadow while the house held its breath around unasked questions. The nursery door remained shut behind Elias Moretti, but his command still seemed to echo through the polished hall, cold as the marble under Naomi Carter's shoes. Somewhere deeper in the estate, a grandfather clock counted the seconds like a warning. The secret room had been found. The paper swan had been noticed. What had once lived only in an 8-year-old girl's midnight grief was now exposed to power. Naomi did not go to her room. Instead, she moved back into the bloodstream of the estate, carrying a folded stack of linens over one arm so no one would question why she was still awake. The 6 members of the Moretti household staff had mastered the old skill of survival. Never look too curious, never speak too loudly, never stand still near a closed door. Yet fear made people careless. In the laundry room, beneath the hum of the dryer and the sting of bleach in the air, 2 staff members spoke in broken fragments while they believed no one important was listening. "The old East Nursery," one whispered. "I thought it was sealed after her." "Keep your voice down," the other hissed. "That wasn't for us to know." Naomi slowed only enough to hear one more sentence. "There was blood that night." The room went silent except for tumbling sheets. That was the first piece. Not a child's imagination. Not a simple nightmare. Something had happened in that wing. Something serious enough to be buried inside the architecture of the house. Later, with a tray of untouched teacups in her hands, Naomi passed the portrait gallery and took the longer route that curved toward the unused family rooms. Liana Moretti had trusted her enough to show fear, but not enough to hand over the whole shape of it. Children hid truth the way wounded animals hid injuries, not because they wanted to deceive, but because pain taught them that adults often made things worse. Naomi stopped outside a locked white door at the far end of the corridor. It was not the hidden room Micah Carter had found. This door wore a brass keyhole polished by years of avoidance. A faint scratch marked the bottom panel, as if something had once been dragged against it from the inside. Behind her, one of the estate security team rounded the corner. Naomi lowered her eyes at once and adjusted the cups on the tray. "Orders are that this hallway stays clear after midnight," he said. "Understood," Naomi answered. One sentence. Calm. Small. But when he walked on, she noticed what mattered. A newer lock set into older wood. Someone had changed it after the room was built, after the family had already lived with whatever memory it contained. Near dawn, Liana came to the kitchen barefoot, wrapped in a blanket too large for her narrow shoulders. The child looked as though sleep had only grazed her. Micah sat at the floor by the pantry door, pushing a wooden spoon in circles, humming to himself in the private language of toddlers. He looked up when Liana entered, then held out the bent paper swan with total faith, as if it could fix what grown people had broken. Liana took it with trembling fingers. Naomi knelt to the child's height and kept her voice low. "I need to understand what makes the crying start." Liana stared at the swan, not at Naomi. "It starts when the music stops." "What music?" "The box. It was my mother's." Liana swallowed. "I hear it in the wall sometimes. Then I hear the lady crying." Naomi felt her pulse change. "What lady?" Liana's mouth tightened. For a second, Naomi thought trust would collapse again. Then the girl whispered, "They told me there was no one. But I saw her bracelet under the floor. And my father said never to go there." There it was, the second answer and the larger danger. The hallway seemed to draw its own breath. Cold air leaked through the old West Wing plaster, carrying the faint smell of dust, cedar polish, and something older beneath it, metallic, stale, hidden too long. Naomi Carter kept one hand on the wall lamp and the other near Liana Moretti's shoulder, feeling the child's fear without forcing her forward. Behind them, the house slept in expensive silence. Somewhere deeper in the estate, a clock marked each second like a warning. Liana's words would not leave Naomi's mind. The bracelet under the floor, the crying in the wall, the room Elias Moretti had forbidden. Then a small sound broke the tension. Not the music box. A soft tap. Then another. Micah Carter, half awake in Naomi's arms, had been twisting around to look at the baseboard beside the sealed door. His sleepy face had lost its heaviness. Toddlers did not study danger the way adults did. They noticed what did not belong. His tiny fingers opened and closed toward the wall. "Lady stuck," he murmured. Naomi lowered him slowly. "Micah, what do you see?" He slid from her hip and waddled toward the paneling, one hand dragging along the carved wood. The corridor light brushed his curls in gold while his shadow trembled over the floorboards. Liana watched him as if he were walking toward the edge of something sacred. Naomi started to stop him, then didn't. The boy crouched with the clumsy certainty only a child could possess and pressed his cheek near the bottom of the wall. Then he frowned. "Bad flowers," he said. Naomi froze. There were no flowers in the corridor. No fresh arrangement. No perfume. Nothing ornamental except old wallpaper faded into brown ivy patterns. But children remembered through scent before language. Micah had spent enough afternoons in the laundry room while Naomi worked to know detergents, soaps, bleach, polish. This was different. He turned and pointed down the hall toward a narrow service closet the staff rarely used. Same bad flowers. On coat. Liana's eyes widened first. The blue coat. Naomi looked at her sharply. "What blue coat?" Liana swallowed hard, but this time the silence did not close. "One of the staff wore it that night. I woke up because I heard the song in the wall. I thought maybe," her voice thinned, "maybe my mother came back. A child's hope, surviving where logic had died. I opened my door and smelled those flowers. Too strong. I saw a blue coat go into the West Wing. Then I heard crying. Not from the wall. From a person." The air changed around that admission. Naomi could feel it. Adults had been listening to words, to rumors, to what Elias had forbidden. Micah had gone to scent. And scent did not lie. Naomi crossed to the service closet and opened it. Inside hung cleaning aprons, folded drop cloths, and one long blue raincoat pushed into the back corner. The fabric looked ordinary at first glance, but when she pulled it free, a cloud of heavy floral perfume rose from the collar. Cheap, cloying, and sharp enough to sting. Micah immediately buried his face in Naomi's leg. "Bad flowers," he repeated louder now. Liana stepped back, so suddenly her heel hit the wall. "That's it. That's what I smelled." Her breathing turned shallow. "And the bracelet. I found it after. Under the loose floor piece near the nursery room. I thought if I told anyone, my father would get angry because he said never to go there." Naomi turned the coat inside out. A small tear had been stitched badly near the pocket seam. Caught in the thread was one dark strand of long hair, not Naomi's, not Liana's. Tucked deeper inside, her fingers found something harder. She reached in and pulled out a single silver charm, bent at the loop. Liana made a sound too raw to be called a gasp. "My mother's bracelet." The corridor went still. Not a ghost. Not imagination. Not a child inventing cries in the walls. The silver charm lay in Naomi Carter's palm like a cold accusation, its bent loop glinting under the hallway sconce while the old house seemed to hold its breath around it. The thread caught in the torn seam, the wrong strand of dark hair, the look on Liana Moretti's face when she recognized the piece from her mother's bracelet. None of it belonged to childish fear anymore. This had crossed into something uglier, something human. Behind the carved banister, the estate's silence changed shape. It was no longer grief haunting the walls. It was someone close enough to move through them unseen. Liana's small fingers closed over Naomi's wrist with startling force. "Don't tell anyone yet." The plea came too fast, too terrified, and that frightened Naomi more than the charm itself. Liana was not protecting a fantasy. She was protecting a consequence. Downstairs, silverware clinked faintly from the staff dining room. one floor below the family wing. And somewhere near the front drive, a radio on one of the estate security team crackled once and went quiet. Ordinary sounds. They only made the danger feel sharper. Naomi crouched so she was level with Liana. Micah Carter, heavy with sleep on her hip, stirred and pressed his face into her shoulder. "You know who it is," Naomi said softly. Liana shook her head first, then stopped. Her chin trembled. "I know what they want." The words landed harder. Liana looked toward the staircase as if the polished rail itself might be listening. She told it in broken pieces, each one dragged out of shame. For weeks, someone inside the estate had been coming to her room after midnight or waiting just beyond her door, whispering that her mother had not left willingly, that speaking about the crying in the walls would only make Elias Moretti angry, that good daughters stayed quiet. Twice, notes had been slipped into her books. Once, her bedroom lamp had been unscrewed just enough to die in the dark. And always, the same warning. If she told her father, Naomi would be sent away and Micah would go with her. The threat changed everything. Until that moment, Naomi had believed the cruelty centered on Liana's grief. Now she understood the trap had widened to include her child. Not because she mattered to the house, but because Micah had wandered where he was not meant to, and because Naomi had begun asking the wrong questions. Footsteps sounded from the far service corridor. Naomi stood, not panicked, deciding. Running would protect Micah for one night, maybe two, but it would leave Liana alone in the very place where fear had been trained into her. Telling Elias immediately might bring force crashing down before she knew who inside the estate was watching every move. Protection without proof could become exposure. And whoever had hidden that charm in the coat pocket had already shown patience. Liana pulled at her sleeve. "Please." A shadow slid across the floor at the end of the corridor, then disappeared before the figure fully turned the corner. Not an accident. Not a servant passing by. Someone had come close enough to check whether the discovery had been made. Naomi moved fast, but not loudly. She took Liana into the small morning room off the library, shut the door, and crossed to the marble fireplace where an old brass ash bucket sat beside stacked birch logs. Inside the bucket, beneath cold gray ash, she wrapped the silver charm in a linen napkin and hid it. Then she tore the dark strand of hair free from the coat seam and folded it into the lining of Micah's diaper bag, the last place anyone in the estate would think to search. "Listen carefully," Naomi said, her voice low and steady despite the pulse hammering in her throat. "You do not go anywhere in this house alone. Not the hall, not the stairs, not your room. If anyone asks, we found nothing." Liana stared. "You're lying to them." "I'm buying time." Another knock sounded this time, light and polite, from the morning room door. The knock came again, soft enough to sound respectful, dangerous enough to make the air tighten. Morning light lay across the carpet in pale gold bars, touching the edge of the sofa where Liana sat rigid with both hands clenched in her lap. Naomi crossed the room without haste, though every instinct in her body screamed to block the door with her own back. Micah rested on her hip, heavy with toddler warmth. One small fist curled into the fabric at her shoulder. Beyond the wood paneling, the house held its breath. Even the distant clatter from the kitchen had stopped, as if the estate itself sensed that something buried too long was about to be dragged into daylight. When Naomi opened the door, one of the 4 guards from the estate security team stood there beside a member of the Moretti household staff, his face carefully blank. "Elias Moretti wants all of you in the west sitting room. Now." No accusation. No explanation. That made it worse. The walk down the corridor felt longer than any hallway should. Sun from the tall arched windows cut across the marble floor in cold white strips. At the far end, the west sitting room door stood open. Inside waited Elias Moretti, motionless near the fireplace, one hand behind his back, the other holding the silver locket Naomi had hidden in Micah's diaper bag less than 20 minutes earlier. So they had searched it. The room was not empty. All 6 members of the Moretti household staff had been gathered along the wall, silent and pale. The 4 guards stood spaced like iron fixtures near the doors and windows. No one sat. No one spoke. Liana stopped beside Naomi, so quickly her shoe scraped the floor. Elias looked first at the locket, then at Naomi. "You told my daughter to lie." His voice was low, but it carried to every corner. Naomi did not lower her eyes. "I told her to stay alive long enough to be heard." The room went still. That answer landed where fear usually folded. Elias's jaw tightened, not with outrage, but with the pain of hearing his own house named for what it had become. Liana turned toward him, trembling so badly her breath came in little broken pulls. For one terrible second, it looked as if the silence would swallow her again, the way it had every night before. Then Micah reached from Naomi's arms toward her. Not for the locket, for Liana. His small fingers opened and closed in the air, the same innocent gesture he had made when he led Naomi to the hidden place, when he had patted the loose panel and babbled until she understood something precious had been tucked away by frightened hands. Liana stared at him, and something in her face broke loose. "I put it there," she whispered. Elias took one step forward. "I know," Naomi said before his fear could crush her voice. But she didn't hide it because she stole it. She hid it because she thought if anyone found it, they would know she saw what happened. Every eye in the room shifted. Liana's chin quivered. It was in the nursery hallway. I heard yelling. I opened the door a little. Her hands twisted together until her knuckles blanched white. I saw someone grab my mother's locket from the keepsake box. I thought they were going to take other things too. But then they saw me. Elias went completely still. "Who?" he asked. The question came out like steel dragged over stone. Liana looked past him, not at the guards, not at Naomi, but toward the line of staff against the wall. One woman there had gone gray around the mouth. Her shoulders had lost their careful posture. Her fingers worried the hem of her apron so violently the fabric shook. Liana raised her arm. It was her. The accusation did not need more volume. It struck with the force of a gunshot. One of the household staff let out a thin, broken denial. She was a child. She was a child. The woman's voice cracked on the last word, thin and desperate, but the room no longer had any softness left for excuses. Candlelight from the long dining table trembled across polished silver and crystal glasses, turning every face in the hall into a witness. Elias Moretti did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The stillness around him had become more frightening than rage. Liana stood beside Naomi, small shoulders tight, tears drying in uneven tracks on her cheeks, while Micah clung to Naomi's leg with the heavy, sleepy trust of a child who had already done the hardest thing without understanding it. "Look at her," Elias said. Just one sentence. The accused staff woman tried to keep her eyes on him, but his command was not about power. It was about truth. Her gaze shifted at last to Liana Moretti, to the 8-year-old girl she had cornered with whispers and shadows, the child she had taught to fear sleep, to fear closets, to fear the dark shape of her own room after midnight. And in that one glance, the lie collapsed under its own weight. Naomi did not step back. Her hands were steady now, one resting over Micah's curls, the other lightly at Liana's shoulder. She had spent too many nights being ignored, too many mornings carrying trays through rooms where money made people deaf. But tonight the child she served was no longer alone, and that changed the balance of everything. The woman broke first. "I only wanted her quiet," she whispered. "After her mother died, she cried and cried. She wandered. She kept the floor awake. I told her stories so she would stay in bed. I thought," her mouth trembled, "I thought she'd forget." But children did not forget terror. They buried it where adults could not see it. The room went silent. Elias moved with the cold finality of a locked door. He gave one look to the estate security team, and the 4 guards understood without confusion. 2 stepped forward, not roughly, but firmly, taking the woman by the arms as she began to plead again. Her apologies spilled into the air, messy and useless, staining the silence more than breaking it. "You poisoned a grieving child for your convenience," Elias said. "You will never come near this house again." He turned to the remaining household staff, all 6 faces drained of color now, though only 5 would remain by dawn. "If any one of you sees harm and chooses comfort over conscience, you choose the same door." No one spoke. Justice had arrived without spectacle. That was what made it heavier. Then Elias did something no one in the room expected. He lowered himself to one knee in front of his daughter. For a man like him, the gesture landed harder than a threat. Liana stared at him, uncertain, as if fathers who missed too much could not suddenly become safe. His hand stayed open, empty. No commands. No distance. Only a father trying. Too late, but finally for real. "I did not hear you," he said, his voice roughened by something deeper than anger. That is my failure. It will never happen again. Her lip trembled. I told people. I know. She said if I kept talking, worse things would come from the dark. Elias closed his eyes for one brief second, as if the words had found a place no bullet ever had. When he opened them, he looked not like a boss, but like a man ashamed of the emptiness his power had left inside his own home. There is nothing in this house, he said, that is stronger than me loving you. Liana broke then, not into fear, but into tears that had waited too long for permission. She stepped forward, and Elias gathered her carefully into his arms. Not like an accessory, not like an obligation, like something irreplaceable. Behind them, Naomi exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. Micah, drowsy and oblivious to the storm he had ended, reached one tiny hand toward Liana.